So like any good substitute teacher, we're going to watch movies. So I assume most of you are here because you want to make video games, and I found this video on the internet that tells you everything you need to know to be a game developer, no experience. It's never been easier. No experience required. They're going to tell you everything you need to know. Take notes, Arsenio. Now, just make sure it's within your budget and your skills. Use proper software. Don't just use any random software. C++ or Java. Otherwise, just use RPG Maker. And then just build some assets real quick. And 2D is probably easier, so maybe do that. And then just sprinkle a little trial and error on there. And in 999 generations, you're good. And then just test it real quick and release it. See, that's all you got to do. So my favorite part is the fact that they never talk about audio at all. You don't need voice work, you don't need music, you don't need sound effects, nothing. The reason I wanted to talk about game jams is because I think it's probably the most effective way to learn how to make games. So you can Google on the internet, but you might end up with something like that, which is definitely not helpful, more depressing, actually. So what you should look for is a video like this. If you've decided to participate in a game jam, are still on the fence, or have participated in jam events before and are just looking for tips on how to maximize your jam experience, you've come to the right place. We're going to help you figure out what you need to bring, what tools you need, how to find free assets like fonts and music, and most importantly, how to prepare before the jam. It's a lot of ground to cover, so let's get started. The first thing to bring is a positive attitude. Game jams are all about positivity and creativity. No one wants to hang out all weekend with someone negative. There's only 48 hours to work with, so wasting time being negative definitely won't help you maximize your jam. One of the keys to a positive attitude is having an open mind. Maybe you can't find someone who wants to make the art for your game idea. Or maybe there's no one to program this cool mechanic you thought of. Do you really want to waste your game creating time pouting about it or complaining? In jams, as in life, you aren't always going to get your way. Find another way to contribute, or another project to work on, and save those ideas for the next time. The other thing you need to bring is your gear. Typically, that's going to mean a laptop or desktop computer and whatever peripherals you need. There are plenty of places to plug in, and BGS sets up extra tables to provide workspaces for everyone. Buffalo Game Space is not a 24-hour jam site, but it is locked up at night. So leaving your gear overnight is not a problem. Make sure you bring your power supply and a mouse. Those seem to be the things people forget most often. Game controllers, drawing tablets, second monitors, docking stations, cell phone chargers, and surge strips are also popular items to bring. Make sure your software tools are fully installed, not expired, and are updated to the version you need so you are ready to roll. This should include your game engine of choice. Look, don't make things harder than they have to be. Use a game engine. Don't waste your programming kung fu on writing a game engine during the jam. Use it to make a playable game. If you need to pick a game engine, there are plenty to choose from out there. Folks at BGS have used many different engines. Unity, Unreal Engine, Construct, GameMaker, Twine, and HaxeFlixl, just to name a few. Same for 2D art programs like Inkscape, Gimp, PixLr, and Aseprite, or 3D modeling programs like Blender or Maya. Even audio programs like BFXR and Audacity all have versions that are free, at least for a little while. Now, before we talk about where to find cool tools and even free assets to use in your game, it is important that we talk about licensing and attribution. At a game jam, you're going to be making something creative. It would suck if someone took what you worked so hard on and passed it off as theirs, possibly even for profit. Return the favor and treat others with the same respect you would expect. Never try to pass someone else's work off as your own, and give credit where credit is due. Don't think you can just add a disclaimer to your game saying that your use of that Rick James song is fair use. Only a court can decide if something is truly fair use, and it almost certainly isn't worth getting sued over. If you're using something, you have to use it according to the agreements attached to it. Sometimes you can find free assets in your game engine's asset store. There's free music available at Free Music Archive and Incompetech, and free fonts available through Squirrel and dafont.com. I know that went by pretty fast, but there are links in the How to BGS Jam Like a Pro post in the BGS blog, which you can find at the address in the description below. All of this advice pales in comparison to the most important thing you can do to maximize your jam experience. Ready? I mean, are you really ready? Like most things in life, the best thing you can do to maximize your jam experience is to prepare. You wouldn't just wake up one morning and decide to run a 5K that day and expect to win the race. If you wanted to maximize your chances of winning, you would train before the race. How do you prepare for a jam? Well, it all depends on what you want out of the jam. For example, I once decided I wanted to make a game that uses a cell phone as a controller. I had no idea how to do that at the time, so I did some research on the internet, got some ideas, tried some out, found a control scheme I liked, and did some tutorials on how to implement it in Unity. Then I went to the jam. I didn't know what the theme would be or what the game was I would eventually create, but I'd prepared enough ahead of time that I could make a cell phone controlled game that used the cell phone's gyroscope to control the player on screen. I made the game in 48 hours, but only because I prepared ahead of time and practiced with the tools I used. Contrast that with the only game jam in which I didn't make a game. I hadn't used Unity in months and tried to create a cell phone controlled multiplayer version of Battleship and ended up with just some hexadecimal grids and some terrain and nothing that resembled a game. I didn't prepare ahead of time. Even if you have used the tools you bring to the jam before, spend some time the week or so before the jam practicing with those tools. It makes all the difference in the world. Install a game engine and work through some tutorials. Or boot up that software you don't use all the time and figure out the basics so you're ready to roll come jam time. If you want to make a 4-player game that uses Xbox controllers, make sure you have at least 4 Xbox controllers. The best time to beg, borrow, or buy the hardware you need is well before the jam. Although you will be in a room with a bunch of other game devs who may or may not be able to help you find those controllers, remember, they're trying to make games too. Plan ahead as much as possible. I decided I wanted to make a point-and-click adventure game for a recent game jam. This type of game is very graphically intensive, and since I wasn't an artist and couldn't guarantee that there would be an artist with loads of time to help me out, I sought art assets before the jam and put together a practice scene before the jam started to make sure I understood the challenges of making it work. That scene never made it into the game, but the experience I gained making it allowed me to build a point-and-click adventure game in 48 hours. If I had to figure all that stuff out during the jam, I would not have finished even a short game before Sunday night. Everything I do to prepare for a jam is aimed at leaving only the creative stuff for the jam. If you've never jammed before, you are really missing out. It is the fastest, funnest way to start making games. Don't waste time worrying that you don't know enough to get started or aren't good enough yet. Game jams can help you learn and get better. Most people think game jams are for game developers, but game jams are really for anybody who wants to make games. And at the end, you'll have learned a lot about what it takes to make that happen.
Everybody get up. It's time to slam now. We got the real jam going down. Welcome to the Space Jam. Here's your chance. Do your dance at the Space Jam. All right.
All right, so that that's the bulk of what I wanted to go over. Usually when people do a talk like this, they start with a little bit about who they are and why you should care about anything they have to say. So we can do that part now, I guess. Who is this guy? So that's me. Online known as Dwarven Jester, but in day-to-day life, I guess my secret identity is Dale. My first computer experience was an Altair 8800. How many people know what that is? Anybody? You're a geek. And I've been programming since the mid-70s. How many people here were alive in 1975? All right, there you go. How many of you were programming? Yeah, almost every room I'm in, that's a no. And that's kind of important because the point there is that I have a lot of experience. I've been doing it for a long time. I know a ton of stuff. That's not why you should listen to me. I have a 19-year-old son who's studying game development right now in Canandaigua, New York. And he's actually how I found BGS. He was in Leadership Academy in his high school, and they needed, as part of that program, they had to have an internship in the field that they wished to work in. So I had to find an internship in game development in Buffalo, New York. So this is the only place to go. That's how we ended up here. That was in 2016, and I became a member of BGS in 2016. So a part of making sure he was prepared for the internship, Futch, who isn't here, gave me a list of software he should have on his laptop. And one of the things on there was, I believe, Mercurial. I could be wrong. Could have been Tortoise, which for the non-programmers here is source control. That was the first I had ever heard of source control. Written millions of lines of code, 40 years, never used source control. That sounds insane, right? That sounds completely insane. But bear in mind, in 1975, there was no such thing. There was no internet. The internet's only, like the World Wide Web is basically, it's 30 years old, 30 years and a couple weeks, right? So, I mean, that's just to put it in perspective. 40 years ago, I know a ton of stuff. The point really being, nobody knows everything. And some of the stuff they don't know might be very helpful to learn. So it doesn't really matter. If you think you don't know anything, you're probably right. I don't know anything. Although I am the world's leading authority on game jams, as far as you know. But enough about ancient history. Let's talk about game jam history. So back in 2016, I came to my first game jam. I had no idea what a game jam was. Brought my son so that he could work on a game. Figured I'm here, I might have done some stuff, maybe I'll make a game. And it was an interesting experience. I had no idea what to expect, so this was my goal when I came. That's what I was going to try and accomplish, is figure out what a game jam was. So I came to learn about that And, anything else I did was kind of gravy. But as I sat here and watched people break up into teams, I noticed there was one person not really engaging in anything who happened to be an artist. And so I thought to myself, given, game jams are a lot about constraints. And so the constraint for me at that time was, what kind of game can I make that only uses art and a language we both know, so English. Art and English, what can I make? I can make a card game. So I did. It's been played exactly once, was play tested here, and that was it. I went home, collected dust, it's in a box somewhere. But it was very informative. The next game jam that came along happened to be at the end of the fall workshop series here, and if you get a chance, to go to any of the game development workshops, highly recommended. Talking to you. And I had an absurd goal. I wanted to use a cell phone as a controller because I had come to arcade night and we'd end up playing Jackbox, which, if you're not familiar with it, is a game that is played on your cell phone. Everybody gets to put their answers into their cell phone and the results end up on the screen. I thought that was genius because who has 20 controllers at a party? I mean, this place, but who at home? Okay, us, but in real life. And so that was the goal I had when I came in. You saw the game that I made called If Tron Had Balls. It was retrofuturism, I think, was the theme. I just learned all this stuff about Unity. Spent some time figuring out how to make this talk to Unity. Formed a team with Arsenio and Tim, who's not here. Tim had to work. Arsenio broke his collarbone. So the constraints became, what game can I make by myself in 36 hours by the time all that happened. And so you saw, what came out of that. But I really like that idea of a multiplayer game that you played with the cell phone. So I just couldn't let it go. That was my plan the next time. The mistake I made, as I said in that video, I hadn't opened Unity in 6 months between the two game jams. And so it ended poorly. The next game jam rolled around, and I had hit on the idea of making a text adventure. It's the kind of game that I played because I'm old. It's the kind of game I played because in the early days, the computers that I had did not have graphics capability, so games were text. And I kind of came here with that idea in mind. I very quickly realized I hadn't learned much between here and here, and I hadn't opened Unity. So now it's a year. Oh, not a year. Probably 9 months. Hadn't touched Unity. So I just adopted that as a constraint. Okay, I'm not using Unity. I know how to program in a bunch of different languages. I happen to have just been working in Visual Basic a lot because of my job. So I wrote the entire game in Visual Basic. I think the theme was one button input, and so I stretched that by you only use one button on the mouse. It's called creativity. Right? But I still was not letting go. I wanted a network multiplayer game using cell phones as a controller, and so the next game jam rolls around, and I'm really psyched to do this. I've actually spent some time in Unity. I'm going to rally people to my cause. We're going to make this really cool game. And I'm talking to Futch, and I'm telling him, he goes, what do you think you're going to do? I say, well, this is what I want to do. I want to make a multiplayer RPG and, use cell phones as a controller, and, it's going to be really cool. And he goes, yeah, make that in Visual Basic. So I kind of did, sort of as on a dare. Mostly because when he said that, I realized, I if I let go of the cell phone idea, I could probably actually do this in 2 days. I still think that's the most code I've ever written for a jam. It was a little nuts, but it worked. It actually turned out pretty good. And I learned an important lesson there too. I didn't need a lot of graphics. I just needed a couple simple graphics, and so I tried to get an artist to make me some enemy creatures to defeat in this RPG. And he was working on a much bigger project, so I got down to Sunday afternoon, and I didn't really have any graphics at all. So fortunately, Quasi was not jamming that weekend, and I begged him to draw me a monster, which he did, and then Wayne came through with the monster anyways. So then I had twice as many monsters to defeat. But I learned an important lesson there about, in all of these, about expecting others to engage in your idea. Just because you love your idea doesn't mean anybody else is going to. That's where the "don't be a hero" came from. And so I adapted. And the next game jam, I wanted to make a game. Most of these games had very little graphics, with the exception of If Tron Had Balls. And so I wanted to make something that involved graphics more. I wanted to kind of take this idea and move it up. So I went back to the stupid cell phone, and I made a graphic adventure game that would let anybody with the app on their cell phone vote on the action of a single character. And you saw that in the video, and the dwarf that's just kind of wandering through the dungeon for a little bit. But knowing that that was the goal, I said I should probably show up with the assets to make a dungeon. So went to the asset store, found some stuff, and then I was able to do that. Still learning nothing. Well, actually, because I spent money on those assets, and one of the diversifiers for this jam was reusing assets from a previous game. So I said, spectacular. I just bought all this crap. I'm going to make another game with that. And I really was aiming for more of a game like Gauntlet. I ended up with more of a MOBA because the level I made didn't... I built the level and then tried to import it into some work that I had been doing, and I messed up all of the geometry of the level doing that. So I had to build another level really quick, which didn't turn out that great, but sort of more lent itself to a MOBA feel. And I think the theme was kaiju, so I just put one giant monster in the middle, and there you go. Had to, again, abandon the cell phone. I did actually, believe it or not, I got the client to load on an Android phone, but it wouldn't accept any inputs, so. But the multiplayer thing, that all worked. So by the next game jam, I think I kind of cracked the secret sauce. If I was going to make a point-and-click adventure game, like Secret of Monkey Island, those type of games, they're very graphic intensive, so I really just can't show up and say, hey, draw me like 5 cool scenes and a bunch of props that I can move around. So I did the same thing. I found some art that I could repurpose from, believe it or not, it's from a European Game Boy game. Forget the name of, but I can look that up. And so I made Arsenio Goes to the Spooktacular, which wouldn't fit on the slide. And that was a lot of fun. This was the first time that I felt like I had made what could pass as a game. There were menus, you could save, you could load your save. There was inventory, so you could manage, you could pick stuff up, you could use things. There were proper credits at the end. Probably the only game I ever did that had them at the end. And that was a lot of fun, but definitely that was the way to go about it, was to show up. So now I'm full of myself, right? I made what I think kind of the first real game. So I thought to myself, what is the only kind of game I've never seen made at a game jam? And I thought, escape room game. So I'll make an escape room game. And so that led to the Jam Box. So like an idiot, I spent a couple weeks before the jam building a giant real-world controller to make a game around. With cables you plug in, and there's some video of what it looks like in use, and different different puzzles to solve to get clues, and I got pretty close. The mistake I made there was I didn't have the hardware dialed in before the jam started. So I spent all day Saturday fixing the hardware, and then I had to make the game in 24 hours, so I made it in Visual Basic because it was faster. That disappointment led to deciding that my goal for the next Game Jam was going to be Jambox 2.0. I'm going to make a bigger, better Jambox, and try to make the game with the touchscreen. The whole motivation for the game was the engineering room on the Enterprise or any Federation starship, and the console that they have. And what if there was a series of challenges you had to do that revolved around that? And that one turned out okay. I still came up a little short, but it did, ironically, bring me full circle. This is an Altair 8800. This is the front panel of one. The thing about these is this is how old as a computer technology it is. There's no monitor, there's no keyboard, there's no mouse. You have toggle switches for inputs and LEDs for output. Now it can be adapted to use teletype and paper tape and a bunch of other really old stuff, and if anybody's interested, I'll drop a link in. Believe it or not, there's actually Altair clones being manufactured now for people who want to play with that stuff. So when I said I've been programming since '75, the first programming that I did was via dip switches. So code control, source control, that's not really a thing. Like if you lost power, it was gone. There was no way to save your program. And I don't even think there were uninterruptible power supplies back then, because what would you use it for? And so ironically, I end up with, on the back of the Jambox, and the part that I was really disappointed I didn't get to, and that's the only picture I could find of it, thank you Arsenio, was an array of switches with LEDs built in for a puzzle. So 40 some years later, I finally found a use for knowing how to do that. Moral of the story, do not waste your time at the jam. You've got 48 hours, so you want to make sure that you take care of as much stuff before the jam as humanly possible. You don't want to have to build the hardware when you're trying to write the software, right? So they did say I would get to make an announcement, which is true. Some of you probably know, BGSJam 14, May 17th through the 19th. So it's only 2 months away. But what that means is you have 2 whole months to prep for the next Game Jam. In another full circle moment, that 19-year-old is graduating on Saturday the 18th. So, on the one hand, he's responsible for me participating in my first ever Game Jam. He's also going to be responsible for me missing my first ever Game Jam. But that's the way the cookie crumbles. But it wouldn't be a Game Jam if I didn't participate in some way. So
we are gathered here today to join these 2 words into one awesome experience.
This weekend, we embark on the greatest jam in the history of game jams. Whether it is your first time or your 40th, you are in for 48 hours of focused creativity as we all work together on separate projects with a common deadline, 6 p.m. Sunday night. It's your chance to meet new people with similar or complementary interests and create something within a structure designed to keep you motivated. You will leave here with valuable knowledge and experience, maybe some new friends.
Did we just become best friends?
Even if your game doesn't quite turn out how you expected. It is time well invested if you want to make games. As Buckminster Fuller said, there is no such thing as a failed experiment, only experiments with unexpected outcomes. No matter the outcome, if you put in your best effort, you will have reason to be proud when the clock winds down at the end of the jam. So here's some advice on how to maximize your jam experience. We've got a lot of ground to cover, so hold on to your butts. First, keep it simple. Think of a simple idea and then make it even more simple. You have to be realistic about the goal. Game development is like creative writing. The first draft is the worst. It is the rewrites and editing that make a story compelling, and those are the keys to making an interesting game. Make the smallest game you can, and then iterate. You can always add more features or levels if you have the time, or even after the jam. Make it as small as possible because you will run out of time long before you run out of ideas. Which brings us to the second piece of advice. Minimize your brainstorming. The problem is brainstorming is fun and gets your creative juices flowing, and implementing an idea is hard work. Every minute you spend thinking up cool ideas is a minute you don't have to implement the cool idea you just thought up. Each jam at BGS starts with a brainstorming session, and everyone should feel free to contribute ideas. Once you have found an idea your team can get behind, move on to the design phase. Just remember that games change as you make them, so don't try to have the perfect idea before you actually start making the game. The execution of an idea is way more important than the idea itself. That brings us to the third piece of advice. Teamwork means compromise. Most games are a collaborative effort, and jam games are no exception. Remember that group project they made you do in school and how much it sucked when someone didn't pull their weight? Don't be that person. If you are a new jammer, try to find a team that you can learn from and contribute to, even if it seems like a small contribution. When working on a team, especially one you haven't worked with before, apply the Scotty principle and try to underpromise and overdeliver. The fourth piece of advice is perhaps the most important. Remember that you are human, except for Greg. No one knows what Greg is. Remember to get up and move once in a while. Don't forget to eat, sleep, and bathe either. Buffalo Game Space is not a 24-hour jam site, so eventually someone will ask you to leave so they can go home and sleep too. Typically the space is open until about 1 a.m. on Friday and Saturday nights, and opens up around 10 a.m. on Saturday and Sunday mornings. Plan accordingly. This is a good thing, since you can use that time to sleep, shower, and come back the next day more rested and more effective. You might even solve that vexing bug in your sleep. Everyone at the space will appreciate that you don't smell like dirty sweat socks. Just because you can't smell yourself doesn't mean the rest of us can't. We're here to make games, but we can't start without a theme. So here it is. I just went ahead and picked a theme. I figured, I guess if you wanted, you could cut that part off the end and put some other theme. It just seems pretty silly. Yeah. So I guess we can turn the lights on now, and if anybody has any questions about any of this, game jams, why nobody showed up? Yes, sir.
Are you going to Jambox 4.0?
No.
What about 3.0?
I kind of do, but I'm going to miss this jam Although, I guess I could just work on the jam box. Maybe show up Sunday.
I mean, a much better question.
Yeah.
What do you feel like is the most common mistake people make at Game Jams that you haven't already covered?
I mean, I think I may have touched on it a little bit, but scope is the biggest one. And it's all like comes out of Jared's problem of having too many ideas. The idea part is the fun part, and you go, hey, we can make a game that does this. Oh, and this, and this, and this, and it's just too much. Just too much. You only have 48 hours, so you got to keep it simple. I mean, this probably for me the most frustrating thing about all the jams that I've done is that the game, out of all the jam games I've seen, the jam game I wish I would have made was Mark's, because it came the closest to the Jambox thing. I mean, no, that's that's where that slide came from, though. No, it's the Dubstep, yeah, Dubstep Heroes.
It's not dubstep.
I know. But you know what we mean. Yeah, I mean, that came the closest to what I was trying to do before I gave up and said, oh, make an escape room. How hard could that be? But yeah, there might be a 3.0, because I have all the parts to make that work.
Thank you, Dale.